And then finally, there was the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty here being signed by Bill Clinton with the same pen that Jack Kennedy had used to sign the original test ban. Together, these agreements constituted an arms control non-proliferation regime. And that was a major advance in the overall enterprise of global governance. When the Cold War ended in the early 1990s, there was another big and promising step forward. The West, the so-called political West, or what we have come to think of as the transatlantic community, reached out to the former Soviet republics and the satellites in the East, creating the possibility of a trans-Eurasian community as well. That new geopolitical potential has been kept alive by a number of international organizations, and in particular, these 17, many of which came into being with the end of the Cold War. Now, don't strain your eyes on this slide. The names and the specific functions are not as important as their unifying purpose. And that purpose was to integrate what had been enemy camps into a single zone of peace and cooperation. Back in the 90s, when I worked in the State Department, I commissioned the CIA, which had much better technology than we had over at the State Department, to come up with a graphic that would show how that process worked. First, my colleagues in the CIA rearranged the countries of the region, taking them out of their geographical context and clustering them in their institutional context, so that the member states of those 17 organizations listed at the bottom of the screen could be rounded up in elliptical corrals that illustrate how their memberships and missions overlap with and complement each other. We gave this graphic a nickname. We called it the Euromess. Now, we use that term affectionately because we saw wisdom and even beauty in its messiness. The graphic, I think, captures the essence of a system in which multiple countries make common cause in the face of common challenges. And part of what we must hope for in the years ahead is the emergence of a more robust globomess. That is, the creation and strengthening of regional and global organizations. Now, I think that the international community can take some pride in progress that has already been made toward creating new structures. One example is the establishment of the International Criminal Court in The Hague with the purpose of prosecuting crimes against humanity. Another important innovation was a protocol negotiated in Kyoto in the year 2000, which represented a first step toward universal rules that will, we must hope, slow down, stop, and ultimately reverse the process of climate change, which is a subject I will return to in a moment. But there have also been some setbacks in the enterprise of global governance, including ones for which the United States is responsible. During the previous administration, President Bush pulled the United States out of the SALT I ABM treaty signed by Nixon. He shelved the START process approved by his own father. He allowed the comprehensive test ban to languish without ratification in the Senate. He nullified President Clinton's signature on the International Criminal Court Treaty, and he proclaimed dead the Kyoto Protocol. As for the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Mr. Bush took a number of steps that have weakened it, leaving its future under a question mark. Our new president has committed himself to reinstating the spirit, if not the letter, of all these treaties. He did so most dramatically in a speech that he gave just 3 weeks ago in Prague, in which he essentially put our country back on the side of a rule-based international order. That will give us greater hope of avoiding mushroom clouds like this one. And that task now has two dimensions, comparing to the task that it had during the Cold War. It will mean minimizing the chances that states will hurl ballistic missiles, like this submarine-launched ballistic missile, at each other in a time of conflict. But it also means that non-state actors like these fellows here, it minimizes the chances that they will get hold of nuclear weapons that they can then sneak into a U.S. port in a shipping container like the ones on this boat here. And then, of course, there is what I regard as the ultimate mega threat, namely the parching and scorching of the earth. Now, all of us in this room, in fact, I think all of us in this country and around the world have gotten a crash course in the science of global warming. But let's just quickly review the essentials. And I'm going to do it with just 2 lines on this graph. Both represent what I'll call the prudent average of scientists' best guess as they project current trends into the future. The first line, this blue one, shows the steep increase in carbon dioxide emissions. Where the line is solid, that's the increase to date. Where it's dotted, the increase is projected to the end of the century. Then, this red line shows the consequent warming of the planet. Let me explain why the red line is solid through to 2030. It's because of the lingering effects of emissions. We are living today with the results of what our ancestors pumped into the air during the Industrial Revolution. And what we're pumping into the air now is going to stay there, raising temperatures along this path until 2030, no matter what we do. Now, please note the point which is highlighted in red. When the increase in the temperature of the planet hits somewhere around 2 degrees Celsius or 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit, say in the middle of the century. Scientists believe that that could be the tipping point for a perfect storm of irreversible and catastrophic consequences for many species of life on Earth, including our own. So what's the solution to this problem? In a way, it's self-evident. We have to put caps on carbon emissions in order to flatten out the steep upward curve, since that's the only way to bend the other curve of temperature increase. And just to remind you of how dramatic a change that is going to have to be, here are the business as usual lines that we saw a moment ago. And there again is the critical threshold of 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit that we should see as a ceiling that we must not bump our heads against. Avoiding that disastrous tipping point is going to require a whole range of measures to reduce carbon emissions. And as I go through this slide, note how the carbon line tilts downward with each major step that we might take. Those include improving energy efficiency, planting new forests, improving the management of methane, which is a byproduct of coal mining and also produced by livestock. Then there's better vehicle efficiency, the capturing and sequestering of carbon, particularly at coal power plants, and the expanding our use of renewables, especially solar, wind, and hydroelectric power. And we also need to shift from fossil fuel power to nuclear power. Now, getting all that done in the near future would be hard enough if it were all we had to worry about. But of course, it's not all we have to worry about. We must be preoccupied as well with this graph and others like it that convey the catastrophe that has befallen the global economy over the past year. And it was that catastrophe, of course, that brought President Obama together with other world leaders in London last month. There's going to be a follow-up meeting hosted by President Obama, scheduled for Washington this fall. For this new process, the so-called G20 process, to be successful, it must allow us, all 6.6 billion of us, to achieve more effective global governance on a variety of issues where the problems are interconnected and where, therefore, the solutions must also be interconnected.